Hello everybody, welcome to the latest edition of the Coaching Conversation. In this series, we're aiming to help business owners, business leaders and fellow coaches by sharing our experience and the experience of our guests who've coached people all around the world in all of different sectors and industries that you can imagine. So very little more to say other than do please now sit back, relax and enjoy this edition, and look out for a special offer for our loyal audience at the end of the programme. Hello everybody and welcome to the latest edition of the Coaching Conversation. This particular edition I've been really looking forward to because the guest this week is my very old friend Duncan Macintosh. Duncan is a founder and senior partner at Capital Law based in London and Cardiff, and he and I have worked together for decades. He's a corporate lawyer. I don't know what one of those is. He'll tell us about that in a minute. Our subject is, how do you get the very best from a corporate lawyer? Duncan, welcome to the Coaching Conversation, and please let our audience know a bit more about you.
Well, it's a pleasure to do this, Graham. I mean, the thing I find fun about this is the conversation I think we're going to have is one you and I have had for decades, really, both sitting in deals and also just sitting having fun and chewing the fat about life and business and so on. So I'm grateful to you for asking, agreeing that we should do this. Thank you. So what am I? I am a lawyer. In England and Wales and in Scotland, both of which jurisdictions I'm qualified in, which frankly wasn't difficult really, we're known as solicitor. But solicitor is a word I loathe. So I prefer to describe myself as a lawyer. I also like to think of myself as doing something as a commercial lawyer that is no more useful than that which is done by a plumber or an electrician. It's just I use different pipes and wires to connect things together to make them work. My specialism is private equity because when I left a life as a lawyer in Scotland, I joined 3i Group, which many of you will have heard of, which was a most fantastic organization to work for. And I've been doing private equity ever since. I founded with others Capital Law, 18 years ago. And we've had an enormous amount of fun building that as a commercial law firm. Most of my work is now in London, but I remain a transactional, private equity focused, corporate transactional lawyer. And goodness, do I enjoy it. Graham, is that sufficient to set a context?
I think you've told us a bit about the corporate law, but let's get a little bit more about the personal side before I move on to interrogating you.
Forgive me.
Yes, I happen to know some of your background and I'm completely bloody confused. So tell us more about why you're Scottish, why you're from India and why you live in Wales.
Well, indeed.
Like a lot of cricket.
Like, this is certainly true. I was born and brought up in India and therefore had an international life. My left there when I was 13. Family is Scottish, so we went back to Scotland, which is where I was educated. Educated there and in London a bit. That's where I first qualified as a lawyer. Graham talks about cricket, absolutely true. It's been my great interest in life. I spent a season playing cricket in 1982 in Seattle.
Wow.
Which was awesome fun, for instance. I'm presently the secretary of one of the professional cricket teams in England, which is Glamorgan County Cricket Club, which is the only Welsh one. English cricket is, in fact, English and Welsh cricket. People do forget that sometimes. And Glamorgan is an absolutely fundamental part of that. And it's fantastic fun and a great privilege to be the secretary of Glamorgan. So I do that too. It has a business benefit, Graham, because the governance issues that arise in sport are very similar to the governance issues that arise in business. the sort of thing you and I have talked about over the years are pretty much the same conversations that we're having in cricket. What else can I say? We live partly in Scotland, partly in Wales, work in London. So I get about it.
Thank you. And I can't get over the fact that you played cricket professionally in Seattle, the absolute nerve centre of international cricket.
Well, it was a remarkable experience, and one day I will tell you some of the stories. The Seattle Cricket Club is still going, still thriving. Cricket was very strong in America. People don't understand. People don't understand, says he in a patronising way, the spread of cricket. You know, you think of the juggernauts of cricket, India, Australia, England, but there's a fantastic book which I'm tempted that we should just forget about the rest of this, just talk about it, called Evita Burnt Down My Pavilion, which is a history of cricket in South America. It is an epically good book. But anyway, cricket is a great joy.
Duncan, I know what you do because you and I have worked together so closely, but I have a feeling there are a lot of our audience would like to hear just exactly what does a commercial lawyer do for their clients.
Well, it's often misunderstood and sometimes abused. But a commercial lawyer, there's a clue in the name, as so often. It is a lawyer, is someone who practices law, but practices law in the commercial environment, not in what we distinguish the private client environment. So the environment I apply my legal skills to is all business related. That does not necessarily mean businesses run for profit. There are not-for-profit businesses. Glamorgan County Cricket Club, for instance, is a kind of hybrid in that it is for profit, but its profits all get recycled for the greater good of cricket. But it's applying legal skills and legal principles to the world of commerce and business. That is the absolute key to what I do.
And would that have a weighting towards transactions as in buying and selling of those entities? Because you mentioned private equity at the beginning. So do you spend the majority of your time dealing with transactions or potential transactions?
In my case, yes. But as a firm, that we have lawyers who do contracts and beyond that. But as we're talking about me, which is always a delightful subject to be talking about, it's fair to say my life is transactions. And then there's this subset of transactions, which is transactions generated by and within the private equity industry, which is I think a wonderful industry to have been associated with, much misunderstood in many cases, but an industry that creates extraordinary opportunity and creates transactions, and that's where I do my deals and work.
And it's interesting you say, or you endorse private equity. You know, and I know that I've worked with you on deals with private equity, and I only have good stories to tell. So
yeah, well,
very true. Very true. So exactly. What would a typical client be, Duncan?
In my case,
what is the kind of people? Who are the kind of people you help?
Well, that is a remarkably difficult question to answer, says he, because it's in many ways the essence of, you know, we sit around doing our stuff and we try and work out what it is we're doing and how we do it for. There are people who come and tell us we should be much clearer on this, but I'm a fairly granular type of person. You know, show me a ball in front of me and I'll kick it or hit it or whatever. I'm not a huge strategist in terms of things, but in as we're talking about my own experience of the law, a typical client is someone who is looking to do a corporate transaction, which is either buy a business or sell a business. And by business, I mean both a company or a group of companies or a bunch of assets that create wealth. So my job and the job of the lawyers with whom I work within my firm is to make sure that all the legal contracts that surround that transaction are robust, effective, and lawful.
And when you're dealing with a client, are clients typically very large, very small? What scale of operation do you often work?
They're not really. They're neither, if I'm truthful. We are what we call a mid-market business. A number of my colleagues have joined us from multinational law firms, and whilst we're a team of over 20 corporate lawyers and then about 10 other commercial contract lawyers, which is a big team, we would struggle to handle a multi-jurisdictional international transaction, and we do not hold ourselves out for that. Similarly, because we are organized to handle complex and quite large transactions, for example, last month, the latest transaction that we completed for a private equity client was a 240 million sterling value acquisition by a private equity fund. But I would say our standard transaction size is between, we can do 10 and 75 million really. And that's quite a special area because the big firms have too much resource, which means it's very difficult to apply their operational template to a deal of that size. The small firms don't have the resource to apply to that. So that's our niche.
And if you look at your clients, and I appreciate you're doing all the contract work around a transaction, whether it's the buy or the sell side, what are the challenges that your clients typically face when they're presented with a transaction, when they're either pursuing somebody or they're looking to sell? What are the challenges that you're trying to help them, guide them through?
That really is the core of the challenge, is developing a very clear understanding of what we're trying to do. And I would say that the single biggest challenge on any deal, whether we're acting for a big private equity fund with loads of experienced transactional investors, or we're acting for an owner manager of a business that has grown it from nowhere to somewhere, and therefore has no real experience of transactions. In both cases, the biggest challenge is that combination of simplicity and clarity. And what I mean by that is, like any project, if one is minded to, one can tie it up in an extraordinary range of issues and complexities and subtleties and nuances. And in doing that, lose sight of the purpose of the acquisition or the sale. And I can talk about this for hours, Graham, but I know you will lose the will to live as I do so. So I will go no further than to say it's the big thing, I think, that in my case, having been doing this for 35 years now, it's the big thing that I try and focus on, is have people, as they're explaining something to me, asking me to do something, suggesting a course of action, have they lost sight of the core purpose of this deal, which is, in the case of a buyer, is I want to buy this because it'll add value to me or my group. In the case of a seller, I want to sell this because it will add value to me or my life or my group. It's just remembering these things, and it's remarkable how often the fury of the deal and the fun of it and sitting around in exotic offices. And I remember one marvelous occasion where you and I were doing that, which you probably know exactly what I'm thinking about, but
it's blurred from my memory. I've eradicated it.
It was just fantastic, because I was acting for you, and we were sitting in this exotic office, and the other side were I think they'd completely lost sight of what you were trying to buy, is my memory. Yeah, we were on the buy side, weren't we? And you did so much. Anyway, I forget which side sometimes, but you were on the buy side, and they'd completely forgotten what they were trying to achieve here, and what you'd said from the outset you wanted to achieve. My memory is a lot of the effort was spent trying to remind them of what you'd said at the meeting before, the meeting before that, the meeting before that, the meeting before that, because they sort of got just carried away in the early burly of the moment. And that is a relatively common outcome. So to go back to your answer, I think to remind people that this to try and simplify and clarify and not lose sight of that is in many respects the biggest challenge.
There's no doubt that there's jargon around a commercial transaction, a buyer or sell, and you're very familiar with the jargon because it's your daily bread. It's this kind of language you use every day, whereas someone who's new to a transaction would not be familiar with those at all, and therefore don't understand what it is that's going on or the importance of what's going in. And I can think of lots of phrases like disclosure letter and so on, or warranties and indemnities, the sorts of terminology that people don't really understand. Is this the example where you're leading to, where you would spend the time to make sure they've got a full grasp of what they are and why they fit into the transaction, into the contracts, for example?
Yeah, that's a very significant part of the role. I mean, you mentioned warranties and indemnities, and they're two quite different things. And there are plenty of lawyers who don't understand the difference of them. And I don't claim to be an intellectual giant because I do know them. It's just because I've done it for 35 years. It's drummed into my head now, and it was drummed into my head when I started doing this. But it's making sure that you are very clear as to the difference. And again, I could talk for hours on this subject, but I'm not going to. Forgive me. It's being very clear as to the difference and why a warranty is right for this thing and an indemnity is right for another thing. And to go back to a question we kind of touched on earlier, is where's the value in someone like me in a transaction? It is that if we go into a meeting of the sort that you and I used to spend too much of our life doing, no, not true. It was, we spent a lot of time doing. Not wasting time arguing about whether it's an indemnity matter or a warranty matter is absolutely critical. It's quite simple. It's quite straightforward. Let's be very clear on this. This is a one or the other. We're not going to spend hours discussing it. That's the benefit that's a value add I feel very powerfully we bring to clients.
Transactions can be very stressful for the parties, and they can be hard work. And whether you're selling, are you getting the right price? Are you being had over? If you're acquiring, are you paying too much? It can be very, very stressful for the parties. Do you think that helps, or you've got particular tools for helping clients who are being stressed through this process?
Yes, it is stressful. I mean, there's a lot of risk, isn't there, with transactions. I'm a huge believer that a little bit of stress is quite valuable. There's probably physicians who listen to me utterly shocked to hear me say that, but I've long felt that a life of indolent nothingness is a life of nothingness. So I don't mind a bit of stress. I think it's important. It's important that what we do is important. If it doesn't matter, what's the point? And of course, it matters greatly what you do and how you do it. And I'm a huge believer in that. But it is important in my world not to let that stress get carried away. So one of the things that someone like me acts as on a deal is a lightning rod. I can be the one that delivers the unpalatable message. I hear other lawyers deliver unpalatable messages to me, and I know what's going on there, which is they're doing what good lawyers do, which is they're being the lightning rod for the client. They're de-stressing a state of affairs for a client. So trying to remove the stress from a circumstance in which our clients, unless they're a big, acquisitive, or rotational group where there's constant transactions going on and there's an M&A team, that sort of business isn't what we do. And there are fractionally few of them in the world. Most deals were done by, with greatest respect, people like you, experienced business people who are running the business at the same time. They didn't need the stress of the deal. They knew why they were doing it. They knew what they wanted to achieve. Let's just get it done in a straightforward way. And our job is just to deliver that in a non-histrionic, non-excitable, straightforward way. And if I'm honest, I think the feedback that we get in our team from the clients we represent, particularly the private equity ones, is we have developed a very effective human way of de-stressing what can quite quickly become stressful. Very important part of what a commercial lawyer should do for a client on a deal.
If you answer the question in terms of the client's perspective, how can they get the best from their commercial lawyer? What are the golden rules, as far as you're concerned, that they should apply when they're planning to work with your kind of service?
Well, the big one, Graham, which applies on both sides, it applies to us as well as to the client, is listening. And listening is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do sometimes when you have a great river of nonsense being thrown at you. But in the middle of it, there is a salmon that you want to catch, and the trick is to listen so that you pick that up. And what we like is clients who and private equity is brilliant at this, because they are almost always, very occasionally you get a muppet, but you don't really. They're almost always very experienced in deals. Is they know that someone like us, I mean, we do 50 to 60 transactions a year. And you know, if you've done that for 35 years, you've seen an awful lot of terrible sandwiches and coffee, and also issues. So you know stuff. And if the client is prepared to buy into your knowledge of useful stuff, it can be amazingly helpful. And similarly, from the lawyer's perspective, clients know things about what they need the deal to do and the business, both the target and their own business, that we don't know. We're not business people. And therefore, it's up to us to listen to them very, very closely. So the big thing I think that helps is this mutual ability to listen.
Okay, thank you for that. When transactions take place, by the time you get involved in a transaction, some time may have already gone under, or some water may have already gone under the bridge. But from the point that you're normally engaged to completion, how much time would that typically take?
Well, you'll not be remote. Nobody listening to this be remotely surprised to hear me say it varies. Realistically, there's a preparation phase, there's a negotiation phase, and there's an implementation phase. The preparation phase is often ignored. Like, I want to go and buy something. I suddenly realize I need a business that will give me a reliable supply of grommets for my factory. Oh gosh, I must go and do it. And then there's a rush off to buy something, and there isn't proper preparation. That's about, and similarly on the sales side, let's sell, and nobody's got the business organized for sale. And again, another subject I could talk about for hours, to everyone's eternal boredom. But so preparation is that can be a vast amount of time. Actually, can take over a year to get a business ready to sell. Less than that usually, but quite a long time sometimes to get a business ready to buy. Then there's the negotiation side, and that's all about the expertise of the negotiators. It's about clarifying, being absolutely sure everyone understands what's being said. Just as a by the by, there's a brilliant story in the Michael Lewis book about Sam Bankman-Fried, of Sam having a phone call with Anna Wintour, the Vogue editor, about sponsoring the Met Gala. And Michael Lewis, who I think is a wonderful writer, tells the story. So I would simply ask anyone who's listening to this, go away and find it. I won't tell the story. It's just a great story, but it's a story about not listening. It's a story about not preparing, a story about not understanding what's being asked, and being ready. So that negotiation got absolutely nowhere because they were talking in two completely different languages. And then finally, there's the implementation side, and that can get elongated because I've had clients who say, can you walk this slowly, please? We've got issues that we need to deal with in Mexico. We just got to resolve those, but don't let the other side know. It's an example of where the lawyer can be a lightning rod. But all three phases, if they're done really well, it's very difficult to do them in anything less than 6 months to a year, which is a miserable timetable to tell people. But you've got to be honest about these things. This is the real world we're talking about. Says that you deals that need to be done very quickly, like insolvency deals, or they change the jargon every year because insolvency professionals don't like to be thought of as harbingers of doom. Restructuring and all that kind of stuff, they can get done very, very quickly, but the risk is completely different. Then the price reflects it. Proper deals take longer, and danger arises when you try and rush too much too quickly. And the bit that I think is the most dangerous is the negotiation phase. Is that's where we see most of the little landmines that blow up when you're trying to implement occurring, is because they haven't been fully negotiated.
In all the transactions I've been involved in, clarity has been the most important thing. If everybody understands what the deal is, including the lawyers, if both parties understand what the deal is, you've got a fighting chance. If there's confusion, then no chance.
Yeah. There's a human. Sorry, Graham. If I could just say, there's a human piece here, which I think is really interesting. Which is one of the things I've always found intriguing is the way you've moved, if I may say this, from a full-on serious business operational life to a coaching life. And one of the things that I've found really fascinating about that is giving people confidence to say, do you know, I don't know what this is about. You know, I'm comfortable that I'm a clever human, but this is something I don't know about. So I want to take time just to step back, and I want you as the lawyer, or you as the other side, or you as the whatever, to explain this to me, because I haven't got it yet. And I've always thought that, in fact, I should be interviewing you actually, because on this point, because it has struck me that one of the reasons that you've made the journey is I've always thought that was an amazingly powerful skill, is the ability just to say, do you know what, I haven't got this yet. I haven't understood this. I just need a bit more time. Can you tell me again? And one of the things that I know you do with the people you coach is try and give them that level of confidence, is a trite way to put it.
Yeah, definitely true in a coaching environment.
Yeah.
Giving people confidence to push themselves or try things, do things they wouldn't otherwise do is
yeah. What's the worst that can happen? You know, you might meet a psychopath or a narcissist, and of course, as everyone knows, with a psychopath or a narcissist, the only course of action is to run away very fast. But there aren't that many.
Just sticking with how people can get the best from their commercial lawyer, do you find that you end up in the course of a transaction with your client going well beyond the legal parameters? Is the relationship developed past just the documents and the exchange of information?
Yes. I mean, it's a human endeavor. All of life is a human endeavor, says he. And lawyers and accountants and doctors, actually, it doesn't matter who you are. If you forget that all of life is about dealing with humans, then you get into terrible strife. And on transactions, which we've talked about earlier, are quite stressful. It's very important to be aware of that. So it is important to support emotionally. It's important to pay attention to moments of high stress, to take time out. And I've worked with some brilliant lawyers in my time, all of whom you learn stuff from. And these are lawyers on the other side. I mean, there are lawyers who I do deals with and have for years, who I just think are staggeringly good. And one of the best things, the hallmark of all of them, is that they kind of understand the emotional flow of a deal, when to push, when not to, when there's, you know, sitting there just shouting no at the other side is about as stupid as you can ever be. And of course, clever people don't do that. But there are some lawyers who do, and others but I think that emotional piece is where you most often step out of the legal side. We've got to be terribly careful though, because we have a professional legal obligation to clients that is regulated heavily and well by our regulator, and we must not overstep our boundaries, and we're careful about that. But having said that, humanity is constant. It transcends all these things. So that's where I see it most often.
For me, one of the biggest aspects in the relationship with a commercial lawyer is trust. Not only is it a professional trust, as in I trust them to be able to do a good job, I trust them to keep me informed, I trust them to bear my interests at heart, I trust them to be my proxy in the course of negotiations. And you place, as the client, you place that trust absolutely based on the people in front of you. And so if you've not got that quality of relationship that you trust them, then you're never going to get the right service from them. You're never going to have the right relationship with them. If you're always second guessing them, doing their work for them, it's never the right starting point, and it'll end up being it'll end in tears ultimately. So for me, trust is a major factor. And clearly, from the solicitor's point of view, from the lawyer's point of view, it's true and reverse. You've got to believe your client's trustworthy and respectful.
Absolutely. One of the lawyers over time I've worked with a lot, now sadly retired because he was wonderful, was a New York attorney called Sidney Blooming. And Sid, I learned a huge amount from Sid about how you do deals. And it's an interesting thing. He's a US New York attorney, and US law is operated in a different way to the way we do it. But he was a fantastic human, is a fantastic human. And the great saying I learned from Sid was, fool me once, more fool you. Fool me twice, more fool me. And classic Sid. But I've always loved that notion. And it's the same with clients and people you work with. Another saying he had was, always do the unnecessary favor. Always give someone the opportunity to fool you once. And that was all about, for me, that was all about him, it was about trust. You start from a position of trust, not naive trust, but you start from a position of trust. But once someone has led you up the garden path and failed to lead you back down the garden path, you've learnt a hard lesson that you do well to remember. And that's kind of how I think good lawyers approach these things.
Duncan, I'm conscious of our time and we're coming towards the end of it for this particular edition. What I'm taking from this conversation is that to get the best out of your commercial lawyer, you need to trust them. You need to be clear with them. They need to be clear with you. They need to take responsibility for making sure that they have explained every part of the transaction, including the jargon and the tricky bits, so that they alone, the client, can make the decision as to whether the transaction is right for them ultimately. And trust is the foundation of all of this ultimately, because they are your professional advisor and you've got to be in a position of trust. Have I caught that about right? Did I miss anything?
I think that's absolutely spot on, Graham. It's where, in many ways, these relationships get very difficult, is if there is no trust. And these are complicated transactions, and things will not flow utterly smoothly right the way through. There are moments of high drama, always. There are moments of stress. There are moments of miscalculation. And I don't mean mathematical calculation, because the accountants do that. And at that point, there must be a mutual respect as well as trust that we're all trying to do the same thing here. That is why my business, in my case, I'm still acting. And this isn't to blow my own trumpet, really. It's just much easier to have a professional life this way. I'm still sort of acting for the same people I acted for 30 years ago, still acting for the same businesses. And to say that everything's been absolutely smooth and fantastic, completely not true. Life isn't like that. But what there has been with these people, with these clients, God bless them, is this real relationship. And if you can build that as a commercial lawyer with the client, exactly what you've just described, then everyone wins.
Duncan, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being my guest on the coaching conversation this time. If any of the audience want to find you, where would they find you?
Well, I'd love to talk to anyone about this. As you heard to your cost, I can talk for hours about this. So the best place is to find me on my firm, which is www.capital.law, which has got 2 L's in the middle, which is curious, capitalllaw.co.uk. And you'll find a marvelous photograph of me on that website and contact details. And I'd love to speak to whoever wishes to connect. It's a fun topic.
Duncan, once again, thank you very much. And there we have it. That's it for this edition of the Coaching Conversation. See you again next time. Bye. So there you have it, the latest edition of the Coaching Conversation. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it useful, and I hope it did what it set out to do. As promised at the beginning of the programme, here is a special offer for you, our loyal audience. If you reach out to me at gwiley@sagegreen.com and mention this podcast, we'll make available to you a coaching programme for you and or your team at a 50% discount. So where can you reach us? So it's definitely gwiley@sagegreen.com. You can also reach us at the Executive Mindset at sagegreen.com, and our website is clearly theexecutivemindset.co.uk. If you enjoyed this, do please leave us with a wonderful rating on Google. We'd really appreciate that. So nothing more for me to say now other than see you again soon.